So there's a very famous quote by Nisargadatta Maharaj, and his quote is something like this. I might bastardize it a little bit, but I'm sure I'll make it better even if I do. So he says something along the lines of, to know you're nothing is wisdom. To know you're everything is love. In between these two, my life resides. This quote is so beautiful and profound. So there's many awakenings that happen. One of the awakenings that happen is this realization that the person, the separate entity, isn't their experiencer. The experiencer is not a thing, is a mystery. Its presence is something that cannot be named. And this is an awakening, but there's still the energetic contraction inside the body. You still feel separate, but it begins to be seen, not by someone, but it begins to be seen that you are not a thing. Then this energetic expansion happens, this second part. It's normally a second part, but sometimes it happens the other way around. The second part where the separate entity stops being the experiencer, and there's a massive energetic expansion. Presence stops being contained inside or feeling like it's contained inside the body in a separate entity looking, and it expands back into everything. And even though it's looking through these bodies, it's everything looking. There's not somebody or something looking. And that is love. That's the manifestation of love. Like, to realize you're nothing is wisdom, and then the love part is when that presence expands back into everything. And the human body will change with that. It will stop being so neurotic because it's no longer acting from a separate position, but it will still carry on acting in that functioning. So it'll still be neurotic and it'll still be human qualities, but it's empty. There's nobody experiencing anymore. And this is total love when it expands back into everything. Like, nothing that the human does anymore comes out of separation and hate. It comes out of love. It doesn't come out of the opposites between love and hate anymore. You see, when you're a human acting, it's always about you, and love is about you and getting and what you've done and what you're going to do. And the love is so close to hate. So when that which you love doesn't behave in the way you want to, you instantly go to hate. You instantly go to hurting the other. But true love isn't based in opposites. It is this presence. It doesn't mean that the body doesn't get angry or cry if it's sad, or angry with someone if life stops becoming conditioned. Life stops becoming about what's this going to give to me? How's this relate to me? And then it's just happening, but it's not happening for anyone anymore. But that human still has to act in the bounds of humanness. And because it's been separate all its life, it's still going to act as if it's separate and act within those conditions, but it's no longer happening to anyone anymore. So it's still going to have the qualities of being separate. But then over the years, those will begin to soften and change. The conditions of the body and the behaviours will begin to change because it will begin to get new neural pathways. It will stop acting out of this separation. But in the experience, there's no longer anyone there. So it's just total love, total mystery expressing itself. It's no longer somebody trying to get something from this life, trying to make life a particular way. So it's total love expressing itself, total innocence. Even though the body still has those patterns of acting separate, there is no longer somebody in there being separate, which is so beautiful. So anything that body-mind mechanism does, even if it's shouting out of anger and behaving in an apparent separate way, it's not acting out of a separation. And separation is condition. Separation is love and hate. It's acting out of freedom. It's so beautiful. Everything is an act of love, though, even when that body's contracted and separate, but it just doesn't feel like that. It doesn't feel like that because it feels like somebody's acting, and that somebody feels solid and feels like it's in relationship with things and it's against things, and it has to prove itself and it has to fight for itself and look after itself. It's a separate entity. Life is so different after that energetic expansion. It's so empty. It's so clear and pristine, even if the body's crying its eyes out and sad. And it truly loves. It loves beyond what anyone can realise. And that love isn't conditioned at all. Even though the body might have requirements and the body might have ways in which it wants to be treated by another person and ways it wants to interact, it's total and utter love. And to act from love means that every thought, every idea comes from nowhere. I know that sounds so odd because that is how it's happening, but we think it's us. We think it's us that's acting. We think we're acting. But actually, it all comes from mystery. There's not a location that any action comes from. We also think that every action comes from the past, that this moment has come from the past. But actually, there's only presence. There's only this moment, and everything's spontaneously appearing from that. And what I'm trying to convey to you isn't a thought. You don't have to remember this. But when you step out of the way, that's the way it is. If you try to remember that everything's coming from nothing, that would just be you, a separate entity with another idea. It is directly coming from nothing. This is all coming from total mystery, from presence. And presence isn't located. The idea that this is coming from a location is simply an idea that's got an energy to it and makes it feel that way. So we think we're something solid inside this body acting, that we're moving our arm, that we're speaking, that we're talking, that we're thinking, that it's our free will to do something. But actually, there is no place that any of that comes from. And this changes the person and the conditioning of the body, but that's something that gradually happens over time and is a never-ending process. Because these bodies, these information things, have been conditioned to act and behave like separate entities, and the genetics give them that behaviour as well, to act like separate entities. So is the dog, but in the human it's stronger, so it always acts that way, and it has the human qualities, the movement towards pleasure, avoidance of pain, the social qualities, the social dynamics. But when that collapses, it does begin to really soften things, like really soften those dynamics, really free it up. So, but it's not particular the way it softens the body. But one thing I noticed about Lisa is like a real vulnerability in the actions. Like, doesn't mean that she's always honest. It doesn't mean she's always truthful. Like sometimes Lisa lies. Sometimes she tells porcupines. But there's a truthfulness in where it comes from. It's hard to put into words, but you can even lie and it can come from a truthfulness. Like this honesty, this innocent flow. Because sometimes it's appropriate to lie. Like sometimes it's too hard to always be honest, like in the fake sense. But when I'm talking about honesty, I'm talking about it naturally flowing out, it naturally coming from love, from emptiness, from this emptiness, this vastness. There's nobody in between manipulating it. But it doesn't mean that it's appropriate for the body to always be like, well, I think that you're an arsehole when he's speaking to the man that's changing the tyre or something. You know, sometimes it's better just to pay the money and walk away. It doesn't mean like that. But there becomes a vulnerability in the actions. Like everything's spontaneously coming up, and it's not trying to be someone as a separate entity. It's not trying to piece it together and make it a separate entity in a linear timeline. It's just happening. And Lisa's always changing the way she is. Sometimes she's the playful Lisa, sometimes the tired Lisa, sometimes the happy Lisa. And in each person's presence, she's a different person as well. When I was younger and identified, I always wanted Lisa to be the same person. I always wanted her to look a certain way and be a certain way. But actually these bundles of energies are always changing. They have the Lisa character, but they're always changing the way they are. And it's also deeply relaxing for the body, so over time the body begins to change, becomes a lot more soft, might even become healthier, might not, but